Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we are in round 2 of our coverage of the 2019 Grand Prix from Latvia. We have 8 players remaining in this tournament. The round 2, we are in the second game, so each of these rounds is a heads-up match, and they play the best of 2 series. So each side has white once. And then after 2 games, if they are still tied, so 2 wins or 2 draws, then we go into a tiebreaker. And then they will play down until there is an eventual winner. Could end up in Armageddon, but they do play 6 tiebreaker games. But today, we are going to be looking at a game between Wesley So and Sergei Karjakin. Wesley So is going to be playing the white pieces. He defended yesterday with the black pieces, and they drew. Sergei Karjakin will be playing the black pieces today, trying to hold on for a draw and go to tiebreakers, or even get the victory with the black pieces. We definitely have seen some sides win with the black pieces in this tournament, but both sides looking to go to the final 4 in this very important tournament, with the race to potential people moving on to the candidates tournament here next year to see who will face Magnus Carlsen for the World Championship. So we'll go ahead and get started. Wesley starts out with pawn to d4, a knight f6, a pawn c4, pawn e6, knight c3, and bishop b4. This is the Nimzo Indian offense, and a lot of players for white try to avoid this line because black has such a strong attacking line, and they just don't like to have double pawns here on the c file. Typically a backwards pawn here on the c file that they have to deal with, and black just has a really good game in this spot. So many times you'll even see a delayed opening from white, sometimes knight to f3 in this spot, maybe even pawn e3, solidifying the pawn chain, waiting to see what this bishop does. If this bishop does come down here, then it has some additional options around, maybe even the knight coming down to d2, or bishop d2 and not getting the knight up here. But in the game, we do see the standard Nimzo Indian defense. And then pawn f3. Now, this is not common. Most common is going to be pawn e3 here. And just as I'm going to solidify the pawn chain here, if you want to take, that's fine. I'll just clog up the center of the board with my pawns. But we see pawn f3 preparing to push forward with e4 here, and just say, I want to dominate the center of the board. If you want to give me an extra pawn in the center, that is completely okay. Sergei's looking to counterattack in the center of the board. Pawn e4 is where white wants to go, so he recognizes that and starts to push forward. a3 here, pushing the bishop back, and then bishop comes back to e7. Really expected him to just take here on c3. One of the main reasons you play the Nimzo Indian defense is to play this move right here. After the pawn recaptures, you can castle on the king side. You have a very solid setup right here. He decides instead to go ahead and play bishop to e7, and then pawn e4 as we expected. There is an exchange on the board, and then c5 trying to break up that center, and then d5. So black has a cramped position. He's going to be castling on the king side, but there's not a lot of squares for black to really go to. And if you are going to extend like Wesley So is in this board state, you need to cut off as many squares as possible, because you really have no protection in front of your king right here. You haven't even moved any of the pieces in front of your king. So if that's going to be the case, you need a strong attack, because once Sergei Karjakin can break through, he has a pretty easy attack on his opponent's king. Wesley continues with bishop to d3. Was really hoping for something crazy. E5 stood out to me as I was analyzing the game. Knight d7, you could see some crazy shenanigans. Knight to f3. Exchange here in the center of the board. Maybe the knights come off the board. Bishop down, h4. Pawn g3 attacking that, but then rook to e8, pinning down this knight here on e5. This would have been pretty fun, but in the game, probably a little safer to play. Not always as fun for me, but that's okay. Bishop to d3, bishop to d6, and then bishop g5, pinning down this knight here on f6. So stopping a lot of the squares that black can even go to, and then now pinning down this knight on f6. Knight to d7, but this does also limit some of the squares this light square bishop can go to. Eventually, we want to play bishop or pawn b6, excuse me, and then get the light square bishop involved into the game. We'll have to break up the center of the board if he wants to bring it here to b7. Really wouldn't do too much here on a6 right now, at least. Knight to f3, just getting involved into the game. Pawn takes on d5. We do see exchange on the board, and then pawn h6 as we got to kick this bishop off right now. Don't want to have to worry about that anymore. Bishop to h4, and then queen a5. Because this knight's being pinned down, really wants to move it, but he first knows that he can't move until the queen moves. This is a pretty easy way to get the queen involved to check your opponent, and the queen comes to d2. After the queen takes, couple options. White could absolutely take with his knight right here, but this is a pretty good square for the knight. It's developed move, controlling the center of the board, so he takes with his king here on d2. Once the queens come off the board, it is pretty common for both sides to get their kings involved into the game. You can't really have some crazy checkmate without the queen. It's possible, it's just not very common, and so decides to take with his king. No longer looking to castle, but from the beginning, it didn't really look like that was his strategy. He just wanted to be extremely aggressive with his pieces, block a lot of the squares that black can go to, and see what happens from there. Knight to g4, just trying to get involved into the king side of the board. Bishop e7, attacking the rook here. Says, let's go and exchange material. That's exactly what happens. Knight e7, check. King here to h8. Rook to e1, centralizing. Knight e5, attacking the bishop. And then rook to d1. Now in this setup, I think both sides are pretty equal. Black has a lot of different options here. Pawn b6, as we talked about, solidifying the pawn chain. What I did not expect to see is after 19 moves, the players decided to draw and go into tiebreakers tomorrow. And that is the end of the game. And if you're looking at this saying, oh my gosh, was there not another game that could have gone over? Honestly, there was a lot of draws today, 4 draws in the matches, and one of the games went 11 moves. 11. So this was about twice as long as one of the other moves. And that was surprising because that was Topalov versus MVL, and Topalov's playing for his life. MVL won in the first round. We looked at that game yesterday, game 1 in round 2. So MVL will be moving on after the draw today. Didn't even play after 11 moves. That was definitely surprising to me. But in this game, Wesley So and Sergei Karjakin played an exciting game up to this point. I was really curious to see how this would play out with the setup. We just don't see it too often in the Nimdo Indian defense. But we will have to wait another day to see who will move on to the final 4 in this tournament. So we have a short one today, but we will be back tomorrow for the tiebreakers. We have 3 tiebreaker rounds in the setup getting to the final 4. But thank you guys for watching the short video today, and we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks again. Bye.